Hello and welcome to my tutorial. My name is Daniel Pantelas and I'm an architectural computing student at the University of New South Wales. The focus of today's tutorial is velocity and movement. The three subject areas are how to measure the velocity of a vehicle, how to relate this velocity to the movement of an entity, and lastly, some tips and tricks in the Crysis sandbox to editor. I'd like to start by opening up the sandbox editor and preloading a map in which I've created. This can be any custom map or even a level that you can find in Crysis. We need to start by adding the entity in which we want to check the velocity of. This can be done by going to Entity, Vehicles, and in this case I'll be using a land vehicle, being the Asian LTV vehicle. Once this is in, we can then rotate into the direction in which we want to start to drive the vehicle. Once the vehicle is placed, we can then build a flow graph in which we check its velocity. This can be done by scrolling down to flow graph and hitting create. We can then go new. The given name is velocity, but this can be anything as you wish. Once the flow graph editor is open, we are then able to add the nodes in which we need to check its velocity. First node we need to add is a physics entity called dynamics. If the model is selected, we need to assign this selected entity. The physics dynamics node allows you to check the velocity, acceleration, angular acceleration, and angular velocity of a vehicle. We can then add the node vec3, magnitude vec3. This turns the velocity of a vehicle in meters per second into a length vector. This is then displayed on screen using a HUD message or HUD message. We can then link the length to the trigger and message of this HUD. To see if this works, we simply jump into Crysis using Ctrl-G.
Maximum armor.
As you can see, data is already showing above at the top of screen, however will not change until the vehicle moves. This clearly shows the velocity of the vehicle in meters per second. We are now up to the second part of this tutorial, where we will relate the velocity of the vehicle to the movement of an entity. Once we're in the Crysis Sandbox 2 editor, we can now look at the entity in which we want to move in relation to velocity. By going to the flow graph, we then need to add two nodes, the math less node and the move entity 2 node. This can be found under movement and move entity 2. We will need to copy both these nodes because the position will change dependent on if the velocity is over 10 or under 10. For example, if the velocity is above 10 meters per second, we can do this by putting in our value for B, which will be 10. In both cases, except the only thing will change will be the destination of our entity. With the entity selected, we can assign the selected entities. Once this is done, we will need to put in our destinations for where we want them to move to. First of all, you can, if select and move is selected on the entity, you'll be given the X, Y, and Z axis number. You can just simply copy and paste this into the destination. I probably should learn my keyboard shortcuts, but it gets me there anyway. Okay. So when the speed is below 10, we want it to be below the ground. We can then copy the same coordinates into our second move entity 2 destinations. As you can see, it's only the z-axis that has changed, since our entity is only going up and down. Once this is done, we can link it up, so the velocity of the vehicle, when it is below 10, we want it to stay. When it is above 10, we want it to move. Okay, we can hopefully jump into game and see if this works. So once it's below 10. Okay, so the one thing we forgot to change was the speed in which we want the entity to move. This is one thing I always forget, and you don't end up seeing the entity move. But once the speed has been changed, you can jump back in by pressing Ctrl D. And we actually see the entity move. So only once the vehicle reaches 10, the ramp comes up. Once the vehicle is below 10, the ramp goes down. Lastly, I would like to show you some tips and tricks in the Crysis Sandbox 2 editor. My first tip is often this writing at the top of screen can make your designs and videos look not as good as they could be. In order to turn this off, simply go View, Show Toolbox, click Display Info, Off. My second tip for today's tutorial is when placing in entities, especially vehicles or entities that you've created, you can sometimes lose them, especially under the terrain or very far away. A simple way to fix this is to click the Follow Terrain and Snapped Objects tool. This then locks the entity onto your terrain and follows it. This can be easy to place multiple entities around your map. Thank you for today's tutorial. I hope it helped, and really look forward to hearing from you guys and what you've done in Crysis as well.